Stunning news. You thought it would have happened maybe 40 years ago, maybe 50, but it's happening now. And there's unrest in the streets of Cuba. And it came out because, okay, we know the coronavirus is an issue. We know that economically it put the whole world on its back. But people of Cuba want their freedom, and they finally feel bold enough to protest in the streets in front of this brutal regime.
Yeah, chanting freedom, calling for the president to step down. They have a surge in the coronavirus cases, a shortage of just basic goods, things that we all might take for granted they can't get in their country.
Well, like food. They need food, and they're hacked off about it. And that's why thousands went out in the streets yesterday. You never see this kind of dissent because it's always limited. And it's interesting because the communists did allow the dissent to go on for a couple of hours. On Twitter, there's some video of protesters turning over a police car. Looks like the United States. Another video, people looting from a government-run store. And here's the thing. We hear about, oh, the government-run store. Everybody gets everything they want. The government-run store sells wildly overpriced stuff with currencies that most Cubans marching there in the streets of Havana don't own.
And Brian, you're friends with the mayor of Miami. You've talked to him. You've interviewed him. And he's been tweeting about this, and he's been speaking out about it. Here's something he had to say.
The regime must end now. It is not negotiable. We ask for an international intervention led by the United States to protect the Cuban people from a bloodbath. Cubans are worthy and ready to rule themselves without tyranny. It can end today, and it must end today. The implications of this moment can mean freedom for millions of people in this hemisphere, from Nicaraguans to Venezuelans and so many more.
The question is, how do we get involved? Do we just sit there and cheer from the sidelines? Jake Sullivan came out and tweeted out the U.S. supports freedom of expression, assembly across Cuba, which strongly condemn any violence or targeting of peaceful protesters. But, I mean, we obviously been burned before trying to help out that sense of freedom that existed for generations in Cuba. Teddy Roosevelt fought there, obviously, and for a while it looked like they were going to have a free, and the mob actually had a huge presence there for a while. They were going to be a free Cuba. They were walking with American flags yesterday. We are an inspiration. We should be embracing the inspiration we give them.
Listen, here's the thing. Cuba is 90 miles away from Florida. Florida is wide open. You want to see, freedom? Go to Florida. And these people would like to have in Cuba what they've got in Florida. And that is why the protests yesterday were some of the biggest they've had in that country since 1994, which is when people started floating away from Cuba on boats.
And rafts.
Some have suggested these are the biggest protests since 1959 when the Castros came into power. But what's interesting, our federal government, rather than saying, you know what, they just want freedom, they've got an interesting take on it. Julie Cheng, who is the State Department acting assistant secretary, said peaceful protests, that flies in the face of turning over the police car and the looting, peaceful protests are growing in Cuba as the Cuban people exercise their right to peaceful assembly to express, here's the good part, concern about rising COVID cases, the deaths, and medicine shortages. We commend the numerous efforts of the Cuban people mobilizing donations to help neighbors in need. So what they're saying is people are angry about COVID, which, wait a minute, how many times have you heard that people say, you know, the great thing about socialized medicine, particularly in Cuba, is everybody's got great health care? Well, that's not the case down in Cuba, and coronavirus cases are surging.
Well, and one of the protesters said, we're going through really difficult times and we need a change of system. So it's not about COVID. It's about the socialist regime. It's about communism. And they can't even get food for their families.
I mean, their cop cars are Etzels. I mean, they haven't modernized anything since the Western presidents left. They have a huge potential there just with tourism alone, should they ever open up their doors and overthrow this communist. But the problem is China's got a presence there, and the problem is Russia's got a presence there. Are they going to let this sphere of influence go by the boards? Dan Crenshaw sees opportunity and is despondent or dismayed, I should say, about that lack of convicted and direct tweet from the New York Times and others says, no, they're not chanting. No, they are chanting libertad, which means liberty. Stop playing cover for communists and support the Cuban people. My God, why is this so hard for you?
Marco Rubio's family from Cuba, he sees it exactly as it is. Listen.
It's now been over 12 hours since over 32 cities in Cuba, brave people have taken to the streets to protest against communist, Marxist, evil tyranny. And so far, not a word, not a statement from Joe Biden, from the vice president, from the White House, not a word. Why are they so uncomfortable coming forward and just condemning this evil socialist Marxist regime? It's been 62 years while these people have been out there suffering. And then I see this tweet here from the State Department. You've got a socialist regime that says to people, you have no freedom, you have no independence, you have no ability to speak freely, but you have a really good healthcare system. They don't. Of course, COVID has a role to play, but this began well before COVID. These people are frustrated. They want to live in a normal country. So why can't the State Department, why can't the White House just say it clearly? This is about freedom. Say it.
Well, as you've heard, some of the lawmakers are upset. They're speaking out about this. But Bernie Sanders, who a year ago praised,
socialist?
Exactly, praised Fidel Castro for what he's done for the kids and the education and the literacy program, but he's staying silent, and it's making a lot of people upset.
Right, and we haven't heard from Joe Biden yet either, but we have heard from the New York Times. They tweeted this out, shouting freedom and other anti-government slogans. So freedom is an anti-government slogan. Hundreds of Cubans took to the streets in the cities around the country on Sunday to protest food and medicine shortages. That's all true. In a remarkable eruption of discontent not seen in nearly 30 years. So they say that freedom is an anti-government slogan, but they do not say what the State Department did, which is it's keyed to COVID. Absolutely not. Then another tweet.
The UFC fighter, also an Army Ranger, his name is Tim Kennedy, and he said, hey, New York Times, you showed your hand here. Please expound on how shouting freedom is an anti-government slogan.
Right. Just a quick thing to add there. You realize if they would find a way to overthrow that regime, what it would mean for other places? For example, Cuba's up to no good through Central and South America, especially in Venezuela. They have lethal and very competent intelligence forces inside Venezuela, destabilizing that country and backing that dictator. If we could find a way to add some freedom and democracy in Cuba and overthrow the last remnants of communism and the Castros, this would have a ripple positive effect for the region. But just they probably will not.
You don't think so?
Well, we're not going to give up easily, and they have no. What kind of retribution will there be for a brutal crackdown? None. They'll shut off the internet right away, and they'll go house to house and deny them their $10 a week that the government gives them.